You're listening to State of Arrest with South Florida criminal defense attorneys William R. Moore and Drew Atria. When it comes to criminal trial jury selection, whether you're a prosecutor, whether you're a criminal defense attorney, identifying your leaders is paramount. And can't emphasize it enough, identifying your leader is not necessarily identifying your foreperson. And there's many leaders on a presumptive panel. Not too many, right, Drew? But there are.
Yes, there are.
Right?
Yes.
What does it come down to? Out of 50 people, let's say, not that you'd be choosing from 50 people, unless if you're handling a murder trial, out of 22, which is right. Give you a weird math problem. How many are going to be leaders?
Well, generally, I think 10% of the people might be leaders.
Right. That's what the statistics show, and that's what I've really found in Broward County. About 10%, right?
Yep.
This comes down to quite a few numbers, a small number in especially when you're dealing with 22 presumptives.
And the easiest way to determine who they are is to simply ask them.
Right. You just ask. How do you ask?
I would say, here's what I do. I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you while we're talking. How many people here think they're leaders?
And then a handful of hands.
And I raise my hand. And now, why do you think you're a leader? And I help them. Is it something you get from your mother, your father, or is it something you have just from yourself?
Right.
Now what they say. One woman said, well, my mother, I had known, she said, my mother went back to college because I got my college degree. So I said to her, she goes, I got it from my mother. I said, so like mother, like daughter. And she went just like this, yes.
And then you've identified.
She was mine.
Absolutely.
She was mine. And the state had no idea why she was mine. What I knew was she liked me and I liked her.
And that's what you've done there. And then, even without knowing what her life experiences are, what her predisposition is, what her opinion is,
right.
We know she's a leader, so we know she's going to be an opinion leader.
Right.
And it's going to be one way, most likely it's going to be one way or the other. Right? She's going to be good for you or bad for you, which I'm telling you, it all comes down. You may see 22 potential jurors, but you really should be seeing a handful of players that you need to focus on, and those are your leaders, right, when you're choosing the jury. Because one opinion leader is more important than 3 followers that are going to sit quiet in the back of the jury room and be ultimately led.
A very good point. The study that I'm talking about showed that one person's repeated remarks has the same influence on a decision as many people making a couple remarks each.
And that's a technique employed most often by the dominance leader.
Perfect.
Right?
Yes.
And explain to the listeners what a dominance leader is.
A dominant leader would be a person who powers their way through life. They dominate, they talk louder, they interrupt, they have greater, stronger eye contact. They basically intimidate people.
Type A is bullies.
But they're
sometimes,
bullies.
but bullies really.
What you might call the big mouths, the biggest talkers.
Totally different than your prestige leaders, but equally as important to know whether or not they're adverse or for you, right?
Exactly.
Because if they're on your side and they're bullying their way to a not guilty verdict, every bit as powerful as a prestige leader can
And
be.
you will pick these people out before you even get up to talk to them, because these are the people that when the judge is asking a generic question to the entire panel, they offer an answer.
Right.
They speak out.
They speak out. We're prestige leaders. Why don't you tell the listeners what defines a prestige leader?
That would be a person who, either through their life's experience or their educational background or their skills.
Their expertise, their skills, their success.
And these people these people are usually the type of person who will share their experiences and their ideas rather than ram their ideas and their opinions down.
Right.
Their ideas are different than opinions. They may be the ideas may be the basis for their opinions, but some people, like you were talking about, they just ram it down your throat because I said it.
Right. So you've got your almost like your expert jurors back there. Now, we got the leaders, all right, we've pointed out the couple of traits. We're going to equate them to, let's say, apes in the jungle in a second. But before we do that, I want to point something out, because we've got the leader profiles, but leader profiles are different than the profiles you're going to use to determine who your foreperson's going to be. Because your foreperson's an honorary role, is like what you like to say.
Yes.
They have a job, but that foreperson's going to be led by a leader if they're not
Yes.
the leader,
That's
because they're chosen based on statistics, based on research. But, some significant funding went into this research that former jurors, whether they were a foreperson or not, are most likely to be chosen as forepersons in a criminal on a criminal jury.
That's true.
And if it's right, and if it's not, what's it called? Juror by default.
Yes.
Right. That's the buzzword.
Right.
In fact, you told me about
Or
this.
foreperson by default.
Right. Did I say juror by default?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wrong. You're right. Foreperson by default. I get so carried away. But the other trait isn't necessarily leader. It's a conviction. Principle.
True.
Right. And so I think somebody said recently, well, isn't that a leadership skill? If you speak with conviction and principle. Well, speaking with conviction, but sometimes principle, that's different than either of the leadership qualities, because I think the example I used was white supremacist group. So many are make great followers, but they have their conviction to their ridiculous cause.
I think a perfect phrase that I heard from Racehorse Haynes was, often in error, never in doubt.
Yeah, great. That's fantastic. I love it. I wish you would have been there with me when I was trying to get this point across, because they're finding now that the foreperson is totally different than leaders, and maybe a lot of criminal defense attorneys or prosecutors were sort of equating the wrong cues.
Correct.
With truly what it is to be a leader. Right. And in addition to asking them, what's a method that you employ? Just where your eyes go, right?
Well, one of the first things you can tell is, where do your eyes light? Where do they go when you first look at the panel?
Apparently, according to you and what you showed me, they go to the leaders.
And what I'm doing is I'm watching them walk in. I'm sure many of us do that. Turn around, watch them walk in. The way they walk, the way they talk, the way they hold themselves, what they're holding on to, their strides, the way they sit, not timidly, but certainly. You can tell a lot about them. That's how I pick out who the leaders are. And I put little L's on my panel boxes.
Right.
And then to verify them, I ask them, who's the leaders? See if I get it right. The more I hit a home run with that, the better I feel.
And most of the time you get it right, but the really fascinating thing is what we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes perfect sense, because you're identifying the leaders on your presumptive panel. I'm doing it when I'm choosing a jury, because the adverse opinions are going to kill the case. The opinions in my favor are going to make the case. Doesn't matter who the followers are to some extent, but flip that around, and who your jurors are looking at is going to help you determine who they're seeing as
Who they see.
right. And
The group dynamic.
The group dynamic, and of course they're going to look at the judge in this way, but if they start looking at one of the lawyers, whether it's you or opposing counsel, that's when you really need to take some action by way of identifying, right?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And you'll know when you bond with someone. We know that. We know it instinctively. So if we don't want that to be apparent, thank you, and talk to someone else.
Move away, right? And that's the art, that's the skill you develop as a criminal attorney in terms of knowing when to stop. But and also when to use it as a tool, right? Because why would somebody want to bond with a juror who's got a fixed adverse opinion that you're never going to want to sit on your jury? Your goal is to get rid of the juror, so you bond with them. And why do you do that?
So that one of two reasons. If they do sit because there's no challenge for cause and you have not been able to strike them, they may find your information, your argument, strong enough to vote along with you.
And that's the ethical reason to do it.
Right.
Right. And then there's another sneaky way. And you're not sneaky, but
No.
I adhere to some sneaky stuff.
No, the other way would be, and this has happened because I approach it the way I've told you, and I've sat down and the state has stricken people that I did not want.
Because you were getting along with them so well, right?
And my thought was, oh, they said I've got to strike him. They're getting along great.
And you can convince them of anything, right?
So that was that's the second. That's a byproduct. That's not my intention, but that had happened.
Right. I know. And this is always
Oh,
the
but you could
difference
do
between
that.
the two. And that's more my style. I mean,
You could do
I
it.
take pleasure in having, oh, that's great. I didn't want to use a strike for cause, or I couldn't. I couldn't. Not that I didn't want to. I couldn't.
Yeah, there was
That's how
something
that
said.
works. And then it's peremptory. I didn't have one.
Right.
Because if you've got an opinion leader, you've got to use a peremptory. If you've got it, but you may not. You may need that for another opinion
True.
leader that's adverse to you, right? And you got to get those guys out. You got to bounce
That's
those
right.
guys. You got to bounce them every single time. And you got to know who your jurors are seeing as leaders.
Right.
Right.
And those two ways, remember?
They're going to keep. I believe what you had said. The term you use is their eyes light upon.
Right.
And they keep looking.
But personalities, dominant or prestigious people.
Well, the judge is a player in the courtroom, but is obviously not a player in terms of the conflict that you have with the prosecutor. So when I guess the lawyers actually, you can have very loud and boisterous dominance leaders as lawyers, but the jurors are going to see them as prestige leaders regardless, right? Because of their position in the courtroom.
Maybe.
Most likely, right?
I don't think most likely, and I'll tell you why I say that. I watch trials a lot, and without giving any names, there's a good
Oh, come on, give some names.
prosecutor who is arrogant, who is cocky, who is I won't say the other word, and unlikable. Personality. Okay, this is a strong person who knows what they're doing strong cases, they've been around for a long time, but they're not likable.
Right.
They can't be likable because they aren't. So that type of person would be a dominant person, and if they were on a panel, they could certainly lead.
Can I spit their name out right now? No, I'm just kidding.
I didn't say it.
I know. Right, so you think that maybe it's a mix?
It can be. If you have both, if you have dominance and prestige, you're going to be very influential.
Now that's another show I would like to do. I'd like to do some research on that.
Mm-hmm.
You have a leader that's both, and I'm sure there's a ton that
sure.
are both, right?
Sure you
Would you
can.
consider Trump to be both?
No.
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 Hey, look, you
He's
don't
dominant.
have to be likable
Well,
to be a
you know
leader.
what it is. It depends on your perspective on the man, but those people will be more influential than just one or the other. But both can be influential and both can be leaders.
Right. It's tough to use Trump as an example simply
Yeah.
because of all of the
He's an
controversy.
extreme.
Yeah, all the controversy.
Mm-hmm.
Probably a poor choice, but right. If you identifying and maybe there's a term for it, but I would love to. We'll coin the term, the ultimate leader. Boy, oh boy,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
All right, Drew.
Very good.
Until next week. Thanks
Very good.
again. Thanks
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Thank
All
you.
right. You have been listening to State of Arrest with South Florida criminal defense attorneys William R. Moore and Drew Atria.